Alright, so I thought I'd do a quick video and share what's been going on. As you can see, I've got a couple of gauge clusters actually sitting on our stove right now. It's raining outside and the garage has other projects in it, so I've been working inside this morning. So what we have here in the front is a bezel off the 1972 F350 I've been working on. And I've took the gauges out of the back because I was using this. As you can see behind it, there's another cluster that looks to be homemade, which it is. And originally this cluster had a speedometer, high beam indicator, turn signal indicator, ammeter, fuel level, oil pressure, and then coolant temperature. And when I started building this truck, I knew I was going to want some more accurate gauges. The Ford gauges work well, but they're also kind of somewhat comparable to somewhat of a dummy gauge. They really don't give you an actual reading. They just kind of give you a reference point between low and high. So I'm going to move this bezel out of the way. So that behind me. So what we have here is the bezel I built. It's built out of 16 gauge sheet metal. It's still pretty rough. I don't have all the proper metalworking equipment to get this cleaner, but most of it is Autometer. I think they're vintage black gauges. And on the left-hand side, on the far left-hand side, we'll zoom in down there. That's actually a Holley analog gauge. It's driven by what they call like a gauge module or a CAN module. And that's actually fuel pressure because this truck has Holley Sniper EFI 2-barrel injection. And right there in that big blank spot is where I'm going to mount the EFI controller just to have it up front. Now, we have a electronic speedometer. It's not GPS. It uses a vehicle speed sensor. And then moving on, that's actually a Stewart Warner 300 amp ammeter, and I have the proper shunt for it. I've seen online there's a lot of different opinions on the ammeters. Generally, the consensus is they're just dangerous. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do on mine is I have the proper shunt. I'm running a 140 amp alternator with a 140 amp battery isolator. And what I'm going to do on mine is I'm actually going to fuse the leads coming from the shunt back to the gauge, and hopefully that might cause a little bit of reading. Basically, I'm looking for either a draw or a charge on the gauge. But anyway, so below that we have a fuel level. Now, the interesting thing about Fords is you'll notice that on the gauge, if you look real closely, that it's not really between empty and full. It's not really I guess you'd say distributed or it's not really, if you look at between the quarter, half, and three-quarter marks, I guess you could say it's not linear. It's almost, as this fuel gauge goes up towards full, it's kind of this, the graduation decrease, or the spacing in between decreases. And that's just how Ford gauges are. There's a little bit of an article on Fordification in the technical resource about fuel gauges. I think the sender, factory Ford sender, is 73 to 10 ohms. So I'm keeping this factory sender now in the truck single tank. Now for the tach, I have a MSD 6A box, and the tach output actually goes into the Sniper module, and then the Sniper module has its own tach output, so I'll be connected there. Now I also have 2 volts gauges. Now I posted something on Facebook, and a couple people have commented on a couple different things, but I've actually got 2 batteries in the truck, and what I'm going to do later on is, because of the ammeter, everything has to flow through the ammeter, or the shunt I should say, to get a proper reading while the truck's running or have accessories on. So what I'm actually going to do is on my backup battery for functions that always draw off the battery, and this truck may have work life because it is a service body. It may have an air compressor, may have some other items. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a switch in and have it basically almost like a flip-flop relay. It's going to close the circuit to the relay or to the spare battery and open the circuit to the main battery, thus switching over power from the main battery or the spare battery if I was running anything with the truck off for long periods of time. Because in the work we do, sometimes we do we need to have our 4-way flashes on. We got beacons, and I don't want that drawing off the main battery and leaving me stranded with a dead battery. So that's the main idea, and it also kind of allows me to keep an eye on the batteries. Now, when these gauges are normally wired, all you do is to go to a switch 12 volt source. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use that switch 12 volt source to actually open and close a relay. I'm actually going to wire these gauges directly to the battery. That way I get, from the battery. That way I don't, just like we could wire a, the 6A box or the sniper, they tell you to go straight to the battery. And that's what I'm going to do with my volt gauges. Now down here, we have oil and water gauges, oil pressure, and then water temp or coolant temp. And on these, now the only thing I didn't think ahead on was there's actually a coolant temp sensor for the Sniper EFI, and obviously I've got one here for the gauge itself, just so I can keep an eye on what the engine's doing. So I'll have to put a T with a hex nipple in there to be able to accommodate both gauges. So anyway, that's the front of the gauge panel. Now obviously I'm still missing a high beam indicator. My turn signal indicators aren't on there yet. Right now I'm just kind of out of time on this. I really just need to get the truck running and driving. As long as the turn signals work, well, I'll have to deal with the indicators later. So now this cluster is made out of 16 gauge metal. Right now my shop doesn't have a real permanent power source, and I don't have a bottle for my ESAB 250 MIG welder. So all this was done with a 110 volt Harbor Freight flux core wire feed welder. So it's not the greatest thing. It's actually got a few layers of Bondo on it, but I finally got to the point where I can live with it for now. So I'm going to turn the gauge cluster over. So I've been working on this all morning, getting most of the wiring set up. Now, but back out a little bit. So you can see my 2 volt gauges minus just the cluster lights with the gauge illuminating lamps. Those are all wired up, but the actual you say like sender or the actual wire from the battery is not hooked up yet to this gauge. I don't have that routed. I'm out of time right now. But I water I believe I might have those backwards, but the oil and water are both hooked up right now. And I've got my tack. My ammeter's not hooked up. I'm going to have to do some thinking on this, on how I'm going to do this. So it might be later on. Fuel level, speedometer. And then this is the Holley CAN module or analog gauge module. And then this is the Holley fuel gauge. Now, I wish I would have researched this a little bit more. Reason being that, a lot of these gauges, a lot of the Holley gauges, you can see, it just uses almost like a stereo jack. So if I unplug this and I just plug it in, and you can actually just quote unquote daisy chain the gauges together once you have one of these modules. So a lot less wiring, a lot less headaches. For me, wiring is not really any great obstacle, so I really don't mind it, and it's just relaxing to work on some of the stuff. So I've got 2 connectors. Now this one is for all my senders. So I've got, now in a lot of Autolite stuff, it asks that you ground near the sender. So if you've got an oil pressure sender, you'll want to ground that to the engine. I was originally just going to ground behind the gauge cluster, ground to a good battery ground or base guard. We got a lot of other grounds already terminated, but I'm probably gonna have to end up running some grounds temporarily. I might just end up using just a common ground to another item like the cigarette lighter or something along this properly gauged wire. Bonding is also really important with grounds too, just to get good continuity. If you have chassis grounds, just everything kind of works together, so you don't have any kind of areas where there's more potential to run currents back through a wire rather than a chassis ground. But now this one's actually input side, so a lot of this is actually switch 12 volts. Now a lot of the gauges, the tachometer and speedometer, both require a 1 amp fast blow fuse, and that is not a mini fuse, so I had to get a Blue Seas fuse block to accommodate that. Now most of these other ones are all mini fuses. They all ask for a 3 amp mini fuse. So all this has to be brought back through probably one of my bust fuse blocks. So each one of these gauges will have actually an individual fuse to protect it. Now, all my cluster illumination, all the gauge lights, I was originally going to put in a relay and put its own fuse, and I was just going to size the fuse for whatever the draw ended up being. I figured it probably about 3 amps for the original number of gauges I had, just using Ohm's law and taking a quick resistance measurement off one of the bulbs, and an approximation on the operating voltage of, I think, 13 volts. But for now, because of the dimming effects, I didn't want to put the relay on the headlight switch, because I was afraid that on lower voltages, if that coil in the relay doesn't supply the proper voltage, it would sit there and chatter, cause other issues. So I ended up just putting this. I ended up just doing all my cluster illumination. I'm just going to wire it into the stock truck cluster illumination, which has a 2 amp fuse coming out of the headlight, going through the fuse, and then coming back to this. So anyway, that's just a quick overview. Like I said, it's a kind of a pretty rough cluster. I finally got to the point where I can kind of live with it for now. The other reason I went with building a cluster rather than buying an ABS bezel that's carbon fiber, or they have a lot of different finishes to them, is that I really just wanted to get the full, I guess you'd say, real estate, or the full working area of this cluster. I really didn't want to have reduced size. This is more about functionality for me, than just looks for so for some custom truck. So anyway, and I guess one other thought is too, all these connectors, these obviously aren't like a weather pack or Metro pack. There's no sealing, there's no silicone seals on them to protect them against water intrusion. I didn't really think it's gonna be that big a deal. I might put some dielectric grease on them just to maintain good continuity between the pins. But these are readily available at McMaster-Carr. You can get these in a lot of different pin configurations. Diameter of pins, number of pins in a block, and you can also see that, just so that I can't get them mixed up, I got a male and a female connector with obviously male and female pins. So anyway, hopefully I'll be able to get maybe get another video once this isn't in the truck, maybe with some functionality. So I thought I'd share my thoughts. There's not, a lot of people with 67 to 72 bumps or any other truck, sometimes you can go to a larger medium duty or heavy duty gauge cluster, and I just want to do something different. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.